Okay, let's go through door 2. My choice is door 2. Santa was unconvinced. Hey, wait a minute there, you cheating? Cheating? I'm asking if you changed your number after you heard what doors we wanted. How could I do that? I wrote it down on the paper earlier. Let me see that. Junpei shrugged and handed it to him. Santa examined it furiously. The others peered at it as well. As they did, Junpei quickly slipped the piece of paper he'd been hiding into his pocket. Although he'd never know it now, Santa had been justified in his suspicions. Junpei had switched papers. He had prepared 3 pieces of paper for doors 1, 2, and 6, and put the paper with door 6 on it into the pot. He put a small mark on it so that he would know which one was his. He kept the 1 paper hidden in his left hand and the 2 paper hidden in his right hand. Then he just made sure he didn't read his paper until the end. The rest was easy. If he wanted to go into door 1, he'd use his left hand, and his right hand if he wanted door 2. Of course, if he wanted door 6, that would be simple. All he needed to do was switch nothing and say 6 had been what he wanted all along. Well, what does it say? He fought the urge to smirk. He got lucky. Santa snorted and tossed the paper aside, frustrated. All right, so we know who's going through door 2. It'd be me, Lotus, and Junpei. 7 plus 8 plus 5 is 20. The only problem's the other 2 teams. Jun and I want door 6. Clover and I choose door 1. That's not good. We can't open either of those doors with only 2 people. Everyone was silent. Then suddenly Clover spoke, her face blank and cold. Why don't Santa and Jun go into door 1 with Ace? They looked at one another. 3 plus 6 plus 1 is 10. 1 plus 0 is 1. Finally, Ace spoke. Then what will you do, Clover? I'll be waiting at the stairs. You guys are coming back here, right? That's what 7 was saying, wasn't it? That had been what 7 said. Till we find that 9 door, 0 ain't gonna split us up. We might get separated for a little while, but we'll see each other again. Otherwise, we can't open door 9. That's how the nunnery game works. I'm sorry, but I just want to be by myself for a while. You understand, right? There was no emotion on her face, but it was drawn and pale, and her eyes were red. No one had the heart to contradict her. The room grew very quiet. Silence drifted down over everything like a blanket of fresh snow. It was Santa who finally spoke. All right, I'm going through door 1. That all right with you, Jun? Jun said nothing. She simply nodded. And just like that, their paths were set. It meant that Junpei would be away from Jun for a time, but it had been his choice, and he would have to make his peace with it. 7 had said they'd all see one another again, and Junpei believed him. Ace, Santa, and Jun headed toward the central staircase in the number 1 door. Clover followed them. After seeing them off, Junpei, 7, and Lotus stepped into the elevator behind them and descended to the bottom deck. They stepped off of the elevator and headed for door 2. One by one, they put their palms onto the recognition device, and 3 asterisks blinked to life on its screen. The door opened, and they leaped inside. Fortunately, it took them only moments to find the dead. It had been placed just inside the room, right next to the numbered door. They gathered around it and quickly scanned each of their bracelets. It stopped. Yeah, it stopped. Junpei could feel his heart pounding against the inside of his ribs. 7 and Lotus were breathing hard and fast. It was the 3rd time they'd been through the process, but they had yet to grow accustomed to it. Not that Junpei wanted to. He planned to finish the game before he got a chance to let imminent death become commonplace. Junpei looked around again. It was a short hallway with 5 doors along the walls. There were 3 doors along the left wall, and a single one on the right. At the end of the hallway, the 5th door was covered by a thick metal plate. Junpei didn't think they'd be able to open it. After taking a look around the room himself, Seven spoke. "All right, let's get started. I think we'd probably better split up. You two okay with that?" "Yes, no problem." "Sure thing." I should probably turn off notifications, oh well. With a nod, each headed off to their respective room. Sometime later, Junpei heard a strange noise coming from somewhere nearby. Concerned, he made his way over to investigate. It seemed to be coming from Seven's room. He pulled the door open to find Seven himself lying on the floor. His face was rigid and pale. Droplets of sweat covered his forehead. "Hey, what's going on? You okay, man?" He was concerned. He'd never seen Seven like this before. Slowly, the other man lifted himself to his feet on shaky legs. "Yeah, I'm fine. I just got a little dizzy, that's all." His face was pale and his breathing was heavy. Sweat was pouring off his face and staining his shirt. He was many things, but fine was not one of them. "Are you sure? You don't look so good." Seven didn't answer. Half of his face was twisted, as if distorted by extreme pain, and his eyes were glazed. Finally, he spoke. What am I doing here?" His words made no sense. "What are you talking about? We opened the number 2 door and walked in here. Don't tell me you forgot." No, that's not what I mean." He shook his head several times, as if trying to clear something from it. "It ain't much, but I think some of my memories came back. I think I've been here before." "Huh?" "I said I've been in this room before." "You were here. When? Why?" "Ali, Light, Nona?" Suddenly, Seven was mumbling to himself. There were words Junpei didn't understand. Seven's hoarse voice trailed off, and Junpei couldn't make out what he'd said. What the hell was that? Seven's brow furrowed furiously, and he ground his teeth back and forth. It's right there. I feel like I'm this close to remembering everything. But I just can't. Seven stopped, frustrated. He pulled his hat off and ran a hand through his hair. Then suddenly, he looked up, his eyes wide. "That's right, an experiment. There was some kind of experiment going on in this ship." "An experiment? What sort of experiment?" Hold on. They were trying to control people. Or something like that. Junpei didn't know what to make of Seven's story. Instead, he simply stared as Seven continued. Aoi, Light, and Nona. Those were their names. Well, some of them. The kids that were there in the experiment, I mean. I think there were 4 or 5 more, but I don't remember all their names. "Yeah, that's right. That's why I'm here." Seven began to mumble to himself and wander aimlessly about the room. He looked confused. So far as Junpei could tell, the man was simply rambling, and there were odd twitches to his movements. Experiment, Cradle Pharmaceutical, those kidnapped kids. Was I working that case? Seven continued to mumble to himself about things that meant nothing to Junpei. Junpei didn't have any answers for him, of course. He couldn't understand what was happening to Seven. All he could do was wait. After a few minutes, Seven finally stopped. He crouched down and looked under the bed. His face registered mild surprise, and he began to mumble to himself again. The hole's gone. No, maybe it was a different room. There's got to be a ton of rooms on this boat that look just like this one. At last, Junpei could contain himself no longer. Hey, what exactly do you remember? Well, maybe you could stop talking like a crazy person and tell me what's going on here. Seven stood up slowly. Well, it's not like I really remember everything. I've only got bits and pieces, and they're scattered and don't make much sense. I don't care. Tell me the bits and pieces then. Junpei could feel it. Whatever Seven had remembered, it was important. Very important. Seven drew a large, muscled hand down across his face. As he wiped the sweat from his brow, he spoke. From what I can remember, I think I was a cop. A cop? Yeah. I was looking for that group of kids that got kidnapped 9 years ago. You remember that, right? It was all over the news. Yeah, I was still in school. I don't remember all the details, but I do remember some of it. I think it was a bunch of kids right around my age. They all just disappeared. Nobody knew why. It was all over TV and the newspapers every day. So you're saying you were investigating it? Yeah, that's what it looks like. And I guess I found something. There was this medical company called Cradle Pharmaceutical that had something to do with those kids. After I figured that out, I managed to get some information out of somebody who worked for them. They told me a ship would be leaving that night with all the kids on it. They were going to be taken to some kind of big passenger ship somewhere out in the ocean. And so, Seven had headed to the wharf. He kept to the shadows and before long found the suspicious ship he'd been looking for. There were a number of human shapes moving near the ship. They were men in black suits. Many of them were carrying large bags onto the ship. The bags, there was something about the way they moved as they were carried. There could be no mistake. There were human beings in those bags. He had moved before he even realized he was going to. Out of the shadows he came, his gun already in his hand. He heard the words, "Don't move," but they weren't his. He felt metal touch the back of his head. "Drop your gun," came the cold voice from behind him. With the words, he felt the cold metal thing behind him press against his skull. Slowly, Seven crouched down and laid his gun on the ground. Then suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his neck, a needle. Was it some sort of drug? As he was thinking about that, Seven felt his face hit the cold concrete beneath him. He could feel the chill of it seeping into him. Damn it. Shit, my head hurts. Seven woke to find himself lying on a hard floor. He twisted his neck to peer around the room. Where am I? There was a small, shabby bed and a dirty sink. A toilet with no stall or privacy of any sort. As a cop, it was a place Seven had seen all too often. I'm in a cell, huh? Opposite the toilet was a door set into the wall. Seven struggled to his feet and hobbled toward it. He gave the door a good shove, then another, then tried pulling it. It didn't open. Well, that was about what he'd expected. It wasn't likely that someone would put him in a cell only to leave it unlocked. He threw himself against the door a few times, but to no avail. I knew it. Seven grumbled to himself as he moved back toward the bed. He sat there for a very long time. Just how long, he wasn't sure. At last, he began to nod off and had nearly fallen asleep when he was roused by a distant voice. There's... over... it's 9. The voice was far away, very far away. Seven couldn't understand what it was saying. Nonetheless, it was a voice, and a high one, most likely a child. His eyes shot open. Here, Kate. As he listened, he could pick out several different, distinct voices. There were at least 5 or 6, possibly more. Where were the voices coming from? He looked around the room frantically. Perhaps the door? No, that wasn't it. What? Go? How? Was it coming from the left? Was it coming from under the bed? He grabbed the bed and flipped it up with ease. There it was. There was a hole for ventilation in the wall where the bed had been, covered with a metal grate. Seven lay down on his stomach and peered through the grate. He couldn't see anything. It was too dark. Now that he'd found it, however, there could be no doubt. This was the source of the voices. For a moment he was confused. Why were there children nearby? Then he remembered what the man from Cradle Pharmaceutical had told him. How a ship would take the kidnapped children from the wharf to a waiting passenger liner out in the ocean. Was Seven on that passenger liner? It didn't matter. What mattered was that he found a way to the children. Seven looked at the metal grate. Could he fit through that hole? He stuck his fingers through the grate and grabbed hold of it. Yeah, how'd you like that, you son of a bitch? The dark square sat open before him. Seven wiped the sweat from his forehead and crawled inside. Junpei waited for Seven to resume his story. The longer he waited, however, the clearer it became that Seven had no intention of doing so. He had gone silent and simply stared off into the air, his eyes blank. Hey, what happened after that? He'd waited long enough. But Seven shook his head. I don't remember what happens after that. I think I found some kind of door out of the duct. And I think I found some kids, too. Oh man, why can't I remember what happened next? Oh man, what happened to the kids, Seven? Did you save them? I don't know. I don't know if it was me. I've got this feeling. I think one of the kids died. A girl, I think. Huh? Deep in his heart, Junpei felt something very cold. Seven's head dropped, and Junpei saw in it a look of sadness, the likes of which he had never seen on the man before. The large man's eyes blinked rapidly, as if he were fighting back tears, and he swallowed hard. His sigh was like the melancholy settling of an old abandoned building. He shook his head and spoke. Anyway, just please don't ask me anymore, okay? I really don't remember anything else. After that, Junpei could hardly try to force any answers out of the other man. There's nothing more he could do. Instead, Junpei turned his mind to trying to make sense of what Seven had told him. The children who had been kidnapped 9 years before. Apparently a company called Cradle Pharmaceutical had been behind the kidnappings and had taken the children to the ship they were on now. They had been brought to the ship for an experiment, something to do with controlling human beings, Seven had said. The 16 children who had been kidnapped were the subjects for the experiment. Seven had said 3 of their names were Aoi, Light, and Nona. That was the new information. He had also learned that Seven was, or had been, a police officer. Still, there was little he could do with this new information. He'd learned nothing about the nonary game or Zero. He had no idea why they had been brought to the ship that had been the site of those experiments 9 years before. Junpei couldn't forget what Seven had said the purpose of the experiment had been to control human beings. Could such an absurd experiment really have been conducted? Before long, Junpei realized he had spent quite some time deep in thought. No time for that, he chided himself. He had work to do. Junpei shook his head quickly to clear it, and returned to his investigation, thoughts swirling in his mind. After a good deal more effort, they managed to solve all of the puzzles and unlock the exit. On the other side was a hallway, and at the far end was a door. They twisted the handle, and with the creak of long stationary metal, the door opened. Junpei stepped through and headed down the stairs. What the hell is this place? The words had sprung unbidden to his lips, but it was clear why. Junpei shivered. Lotus and Seven reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped short, terrified. This room is really creepy. I think we ought to get the hell out of here now. He jogged up the stairs on the opposite side of the room and shook the door on the wall next to the catwalk. It didn't open, and he muttered to himself. Figures. It's locked, isn't it? Yup. Don't know why I thought this wouldn't be any different. Junpei looked around the room again. In the center of it was a chair. The back of it was covered with electrodes connected to a nest of wires. Beneath it was a strange glass panel. Junpei wasn't sure what it was for, but it made him uncomfortable. Whatever might have been beyond the glass, Junpei couldn't tell. It was too dark. Junpei turned to look at the right side of the room. There was a table covered with a piece of cloth. Parts of the cloth were stained with something that looked suspiciously like blood. On top of the table were a number of metal instruments. Junpei didn't know what they were for, and he had a feeling he didn't want to find out. His mind began to imagine what could have taken place in that dark, cold room. The things he imagined were not pleasant. Junpei shook his head in an attempt to clear it, and tried to focus on something else. Anyway, we don't want to stay here any longer than we got to. Let's figure out the puzzle and get the hell out of here. Come on. The room was small, but it proved difficult to search. Though it took longer than they'd expected, eventually Junpei, Lotus, and Seven managed to find the sun key. There was a strange box in the corner of the room. Inserting the sun key caused it to hum to life. A cold, inhuman voice filled the room. Commencing experiment. Please place female test subject in the chair. Electrical discharge will last for the duration of the experiment, after which the door will unlock. Whoa, what the heck? What was that? It said something about putting a female test subject in the chair. Their eyes turned immediately to Lotus. She raised her hands and backed away. Hey, don't even think about it. I'm not getting in that thing, no way. Besides, how do you know I'm really a woman? What? Don't be an idiot, Seven. No way, hell no. Were you listening? Electrical discharge? I'm allergic to electricity, I can't get in there. Oh, I guess that would be a problem. She's not allergic to electricity. Junpei and Seven tried sitting in the chair, but incorrect gender. Please try again. Oh, come on. This is ridiculous. A good deal of discussion followed, but once Lotus saw that their options had been exhausted, she resigned herself to her fate. All right, fine. I just need to sit here, right? Are you sure you're okay with this? Yes. Maybe we should just forget it. Oh, come on. First it's sit, then it's maybe don't sit. Make up your mind. Hey, I never told you to sit. Me either. Then what are we going to do? If I don't sit in that damn chair, we'll be locked in here until the boat sinks. Do you really want to do that? Neither man spoke. They only looked at one another and nodded. Okay. We'll be right here. If something happens, we'll do whatever we can to help. Thanks. Hopefully it won't come to that. After her words had made it clear that Lotus would book no argument, she turned and walked toward the chair without hesitation. But she did not sit down. Despite what she had said, she did indeed feel hesitation. Her legs shook. Look, do you think you could do me one last favor? Don't say last. You're making me nervous. Just listen. If something happens to me, I want you to tell my daughters that I loved them very much. No, tell them that I will always love them. Daughters? You've got kids? Yes, I do. I suppose they're about your age, Junpei. How old are you? They're twins. I had them when I was young after some things happened. Their names are Nona and... Wait, Nona? Junpei's words shot out before he even realized what he was saying. He remembered the story Seven had told him. Aoi, Light, and Nona. Those were their names. Well, some of them. The kids that were there in the experiment, I mean. What the hell? What's wrong with you? Lotus took a step back from Junpei. Seven looked just as shocked as Junpei. He blinked his eyes rapidly as if he weren't sure if he was completely awake. No way, it couldn't be. Lotus, is your last name Kashiwabara? Lotus's eyes went wide. How do you know that? Are you serious? What the hell is this? There's no way you're that kid's mom. That kid? What do you mean, that kid? Why are you acting like you've met her? I have. What? Yeah, I met one of your kids. When? 9 years ago. Where? On this ship. Why were you... It's not a short story. I don't care how long it is. Tell me, please. What happened here? Seven glanced at Junpei, then turned back to Lotus and began to speak. It was the same story Junpei had heard only minutes before. Every detail. At last, Seven finished. Lotus shook her head. Oh my god. Everything I've been looking for the last 9 years. The person who had all the answers was right here. Looking for? Yes, that's right. 9 years ago, my daughters disappeared. Then, 9 days later, they came back. They never told me what had happened to them over those 9 days. I took them to the doctor, but I was told they hadn't been hurt in any way. Still, I was sure that they had been through something terrible, so I couldn't bring myself to force them to talk about it. If I did, then I'd force them to relive whatever horrors they'd been through. I didn't have any choice. I had to try to ignore it and move on. A few months passed. Gradually, they started to act like they always had before they disappeared. They smiled and made jokes and did all the silly things kids do. It got harder and harder for me to ask them about what had happened. How could I ask them to remember that? Eventually, I knew there was no way I could do it. But I'm still a mother. I couldn't simply forget that something terrible had happened to my children. So I decided I would investigate what had happened on my own. I would find out what had happened during those 9 missing days. What did you find out? Nothing. The police pretended to be concerned, but they didn't do anything. Once the 16 children who had gone missing came back, things were just swept under the rug. Even the media didn't talk about what had happened. I figured someone was probably paying or threatening them to keep their mouths shut. Cradle Pharmaceutical. No, probably something even bigger than that. Cradle Pharmaceutical. Have you heard of them before? No, that's the first time I've ever heard that name. 7. How did you find out that Cradle Pharmaceutical was connected to the kidnappings in the first place? I figured finding out whatever the victims had in common would lead me to the culprit. That's what any good cop does. What do they have in common? Every single one of the kids who disappeared had gone to this one hospital at some point. The hospital was one of a bunch that were under the control of Cradle Pharmaceutical. After that, it was just about connecting the dots. The hospital. The hospital. For a while, I was trying to get some kind of story out of the kids at the hospital. One of them told a weird story. What was it? Have you heard about the Gansfeld experiment? I guess all these kids had to go through it while they were at the hospital. I think it was passed off as some sort of counseling. 7 cleared his throat and proceeded to explain the Gansfeld experiment. First, subjects Q and A are put into separate rooms, far away from one another. Then a series of video images are shown to subject Q, who is told to send the images to subject A by thinking about them. Subject A, on the other hand, is put in a large reclining chair and given a blindfold. With their senses cut off, A is asked to guess what images Q is looking at. Oh, yes, I've heard of that. It's a famous telepathy experiment, isn't it? Telepathy, telepathy. Junpei rolled the word over in his mind. That's how the experiment on the ship was supposed to work. The experiment to control people, right? Yeah. I don't know if any of the telepathy stuff really exists, but maybe someone from Cradle Pharmaceutical bought into it. Lotus grunted. Seven had been thinking hard for the last several minutes and finally spoke. Even if that is the case, I still don't get how that has anything to do with any of this. The nunnery game, Zero, why we were kidnapped. What does any of that have to do with telepathy? I know I brought all this up, but I have no idea. Maybe none of this stuff is connected after all. Then, in that moment of silence, a cold voice echoed down from the ceiling. Unable to confirm proper subject placement. Altering test parameters. New parameters. Male less than 70 kilograms. Huh? No! Data collection complete. Unlocking door now. They stepped out through the door to find themselves in a short hallway. At the end was an elevator. Junpei, Lotus, and Seven crammed themselves into it and headed for the top floor. The door slid open and they tumbled out. When they looked around, the room seemed familiar. C-Deck. Yeah. Let's go. Without waiting for a response, Seven took off toward the hallway on the left. Junpei and Lotus followed. The hallway seemed endless. Their destination had already been decided. The door behind the central staircase. There was a sun symbol engraved on the keyhole of that door, and Junpei had the sun key in his pocket. He'd found it in the last room. No doubt about it, the sun key would unlock the door they were heading for. That was why they ran for the central staircase. The Jupiter door was already unlocked. Junpei grabbed hold of the doorknob and threw it open. They rushed through and stopped cold. The terrible scene before them made their blood run cold. 3 people lay dead on the floor, covered in blood. Junpei felt a cold sweat trickle down his spine. He couldn't breathe. His legs shook. His body felt cold, deathly cold, but his blood was boiling hot. He could feel his mind begin to fade. He couldn't think. He couldn't concentrate. His mind was blank. What the hell? What the hell happened? Seven's voice was weak and broken. He edged toward the bodies, his movement stiff. He bent down over Clover and pressed his fingers to her wrist. Nothing. She's dead. Suddenly, Lotus moved. Before he understood what was happening, her hand was in Junpei's vest pocket. Hey, what are you doing? He leaped back. Lotus looked up at him, terrified. The key. Give me the sun key. Why? Why do you think? We have to get out of here before the murderer comes back. The murderer. The murderer. Once again, Junpei looked at the dead bodies. Santa, Clover, and Ace. That meant that the person who had killed them was... No. No, it couldn't be true. Before Junpei could react, Lotus dove back into his pocket and came out with the key. Let's go. Without waiting for Seven or Junpei, she ran, straight for the central staircase. They followed. Junpei shut his eyes and swallowed his emotions. Morning would have to wait. Soon they stood in front of the door. Lotus shoved the sun key into the keyhole and twisted it hard. But... why? What happened? Nothing happened. I didn't feel it unlock. Oh no, is it the wrong key? I don't know, maybe. Lotus sighed, defeated, and leaned against the doorknob. She felt it twist. A small gap appeared between the door and the frame. What the hell is this? You mean the door was already unlocked? Why? How would I know that? Whatever, let's just go. Lotus took a deep breath and slowly opened the door the rest of the way. In front of them was another hallway. It stretched out toward the bow of the ship. They began to run. Faster and faster they ran, trying desperately to reach the end of the hallway. A few seconds later, they were there. In front of them stood a massive metal door. They were all breathing heavily as Junpei spoke. What the hell is this door? I can't see anything that looks like a doorknob or switch or lever or card reader or anything. How the fuck are we supposed to open this? We don't have a choice. We're gonna have to go back. No, I'm not going back there. There's a murderer back there. There was more stark terror in Lotus's voice than authority. She was almost begging. But I don't see any other doors. As he spoke, Seven stepped toward the door in front of them, as if to illustrate that it was the only door. It opened. Nothing surprising, a simple automatic door. Look, guys, I've got a really bad feeling about all this. The other doors were already unlocked, and this one's automatic. We haven't seen anything like this before. How could their situation possibly get worse? 3 people were already dead. They'd hit the bottom, Junpei told himself. There was nowhere to go but up. He stepped through the door. And whatever hope Junpei had managed to summon disappeared. No. It wasn't true. It couldn't be true. It was impossible. Utterly impossible. It was a dream. It had to be a dream. A nightmare. Yes, it was a nightmare. And if he could just wake up. He was seeing things. Yes, that was it. This was a hallucination. A lie. It wasn't real. It wasn't real. It wasn't real, right? June? No, the code names meant nothing now. Connie. Junpei cried out and leaped through the door. He flew to her side, his heart like a stone in his chest. Connie, hang on. Junpei swept her up and shook her by the shoulder. She moaned and her eyes fluttered open, but only barely. Connie. Jumpy? Her face was pale, and her lips were dry and cracked. Her eyes were blank and cloudy. They stared straight at Junpei, but saw nothing. Junpei put his hand against the small of her back to hold her up. It felt warm and wet. He lifted his hand up. It was covered in blood. Oh man, Connie. What the hell happened to you? How did this happen? It was all he could do not to break into tears. Jumpy, I'm sorry. Her voice was thin, a minuscule thread that was the only thing keeping her with him. I might not make it. No way am I gonna let you die. I'm gonna save you, I promise. Thank you, Jumpy. Thank you so much for everything. I was really happy to see you again, Jumpy. Really happy. Don't give me that I was crap. You're gonna see me again lots more times. You've just gotta hang on, alright, Connie? You... What could he do? He tore himself away from her. For just a moment, he told himself. Junpei scrambled at the nearby ladder. He reached the top. A submarine? What on earth was a submarine doing there? No, that didn't matter. Nothing mattered except saving Connie. That was the only thing he wanted. Desperate, he slid back down and rushed over to Akane. Just hang on a little longer. I found a submarine, but I need to go see if it works. No, don't go. Please don't go. Please just stay with me, okay? I want to be closer to you, Jumpy, when I... Connie. Jumpy, did you know? You meant a lot to me when we were kids. I've liked you for a long time, Junpei. A really long time. Junpei's vision had gone blurry. It took him a moment to realize his eyes were filled with tears. He could feel a piercing point of heat deep in his heart, like a white-hot flame. Jumpy, do you remember how we hung out a lot when we were kids? We went to the pool and to the fair. Do you remember playing snowball at the school? They're all memories I'll never forget. All of those moments are treasures to me. But I also wanted to go to a lot of other places with you. A lot more. But that won't happen now. No, I mean, yes, it will happen. We'll go all sorts of places, Connie. You hear me? I promise. We'll go wherever you want. Really? Yeah, really, I swear. That makes me happy. Really happy. She said it to herself over and over, a weak smile creasing her tired face. Jumpy. I feel sleepy. No, Connie, don't fall asleep. Thank you, Jumpy. Thank you so much. Her eyes were slowly closing. Junpei screamed even as he felt his throat go hoarse. Connie! 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 Time passed. Junpei wept, curled around Connie's body. He cried and cried until he had no tears left. When the last tear fell, Junpei was no more. His body remained, but only as an empty shell. Somewhere he heard a bell ring. It was the clock at the central staircase. It rang 5 times, then faded. 5 o'clock. Quietly, gently, softly, he set Connie down on the floor. Slowly, Junpei stood. Only then did he realize that Seven and Lotus had not followed him. Where had they gone? Slowly he looked around the room. There was nothing, no sign that they had ever been there. It felt as though every part of Junpei's body was made of lead. Slowly he made his way to the door he'd come through. Junpei passed through the gate and into the hallway. His heart rattled in his chest, an empty, lifeless thing. It had been so utterly broken that there was nothing left to feel. When he saw their bodies, he simply stared. It was a lake, a sea of blood. 2 bodies lay in it. There was no need to check. There was no breath left in them. His eyes lit on Lotus's wrist. Her bracelet, it was gone. He stared. It meant nothing to him. He didn't care anymore. He couldn't care anymore. Junpei's body felt numb. A part of him knew the lump of lead in his chest had once been a heart. He couldn't quite remember what it had been for. Tears poured from his eyes in great streams. He wasn't sure why. He gave up trying to make them stop. He turned around. The door opened again, and slowly, numbly, he walked through. He kept walking. Why stop? An object set in motion, simple inertia carried him forward. Eventually, he found himself in front of the submarine. His arm reached for the hatch. And then he was floating in water. His eyes stared down into it. He couldn't see the bottom. His back was hot. Dimly, he felt the blade of a knife in it. Who? One dead body lay behind door number 5. The body of the 9th man. Another lay in the shower room. The body of Snake. At the central staircase were 3 more. Ace, Santa, and Clover. Just outside the door were 2 corpses, those of Seven and Lotus. And in this very room lay the body that had once been Connie. And now Junpei would join them. Who then had killed them all? Who? Junpei let out one last breath. Faintly, he felt the bubbles creep up the side of his face. His consciousness faded quickly, dissolving away into the cold, gentle lapping of the water. At last they reached the stairs and Junpei spoke. All right, I'm thinking we should probably split up. I'll head back to the stairs and take the elevator down to E deck. June, you can take the stairs up to B deck. All right, that sounds good. But, what? Could you stop calling me by that code name when we're alone? Huh? Oh, sure, right. I'll do that. There was a reason Junpei persisted in calling her June even when they were alone. Although perhaps not the best reason, he was embarrassed to call her by the nickname he'd used when they were children, Connie. 9 years ago it came naturally, after all they were children, but now that they were adults it felt strange. Of course, to call her Miss Kurashiki would be even more awkward, and simply Kurashiki would seem a little brusque. And although he couldn't put his finger on why, it felt somewhat forward to call her Kane when they hadn't seen one another for so long. In short, it was simply easier for him to call her June and leave it at that. All right, I'm going then. Yeah, be careful, Connie. June, or perhaps more appropriately, Connie, blushed and smiled. You be careful too, Jumpy. Yeah, got it. Take care. Junpei looked after her for a moment as she ran up the stairs, then turned around and took off for the hallway. Tragedy always strikes when one least expects it. But to wait for a man to stand before striking him down seems almost crueler than dealing the fatal blow while he lies on the ground. A light in a dark place, June's smile had given him hope, both for escape and, possibly, for something else. It was that hope that raised his spirits just enough that they might soon be fully dashed. He opened the elevator door, and there she was. A woman sat, slouched against the wall. Lotus. Junpei felt his blood turn to ice. Her body was limp, and her skin, smooth and pale as always, was covered in bright red blood. Junpei felt his chest constrict. He couldn't breathe, and his legs began to shake. A slow, cold drop of sweat trickled down his back. He felt his stomach somersault. Junpei's mind went blank, all his thoughts replaced with endless hissing white. Driven by little more than instinct, he began to walk toward Lotus slowly. Each slow movement of his stiff limbs brought him closer to her corpse. Finally, he stood next to her. Robotically, he bent down and put his hand against her neck. There was no pulse, no rise and fall of breathing, She was slightly warm. Something somewhere in Junpei's shaken mind told him that meant she had been killed recently. Yes, Junpei thought, his mind slowly returning. She had been killed. Someone had killed her. There was a deep cut on the left side of her chest. Blood still oozed from it, although clearly her heart had stopped beating some time ago. The weapon had been a knife then. Perhaps she had been stabbed in the heart once. She would have died immediately. He took little comfort from knowing she must have suffered very little. Only then did Junpei notice. Lotus's bracelet was gone. Lastly, let us discuss how to remove the bracelets. There are only 2 ways to do so. 1. You escape from this ship. 2. Your heart rate reaches 0. In other words, once the bracelet is taken outside the confines of the ship or detects that its wearer's heartbeat has fallen to 0, it will shut down automatically. Was that why the killer had ended Lotus's life? So that they might have the number 8 bracelet? If that was true, then the killer was whoever wanted the number 8 bracelet. Or perhaps more accurately, the person who would gain the most by obtaining bracelet number 8. Who is that? Who would benefit the most from the number 8 bracelet? The thought had only just entered Junpei's mind when he heard a noise, a sound like a sharp knife cutting through wet meat. It struck him as strange that the noise came from inside his own body. A moment later, the pain hit him. It wasn't merely pain, there was heat, extreme heat as well. He felt as though molten iron had been splashed against the side of his body. Finally, his brain made the connection. He had been stabbed. But where? His body was quickly going numb. He couldn't tell where the knife had met his flesh. Given the circumstances, however, he had most likely been stabbed in the back. Whoever had killed Lotus had now done the same to Junpei as well. His voice was little more than a weak groan. With what little strength he had left, Junpei turned his body, trying to catch a glimpse of his attacker. But as he did, the knife dug itself in deeper, twisting viciously. He collapsed to the floor, a puppet with its strings cut. His arms and legs lay where they fell, oddly twisted and awkwardly positioned. Junpei's body was entirely numb. He could feel the blood leaking out of him, but nothing would move. Nothing save his eyes. As he lay on the floor, his life ebbing away, Junpei finally saw his attacker. 2 tiny images of the killer reflected in his eyes. With that recognition came nothing. He felt no emotions, not anger, not sadness, not regret. The paralysis that had claimed his body had reached his mind. His killer glanced down at his body. Then, without a word, climbed into the elevator and was gone. His eyesight began to fade. The world grew blurry and began to dissolve into an empty white fog. The fog crept into the edges of his mind and worked inexorably inward. Soon it swallowed up the last that remained of Junpei's mind, and his consciousness left him. There was nothing more. Into utter emptiness he fell, into 0. Whatever Junpei had been was gone.